Adding to the many challenges transformational programs face is that much of this work requires companies to partner with third parties such as outsourcers and systems integrators. Now, although those relationships can be problematic because they introduce another point of failure into the environment, those third-party relationships can be incredible change enablers. The cool thing is, and this is often overlooked, is that the deal work we have to do to enter into these transformational relationships allows us to construct the building blocks of a transformational ecosystem within an environment that's controlled. That means that we can get this right through effective design rather than by chance. And this is incredibly valuable to your program as a whole. But like everything else in life, there's a catch. Making this work requires us to understand relationship complexity. Otherwise, we end up facing obstacles and potential failure without ever recognizing the root cause. Unfortunately, most companies simply get this dead wrong. The good news is that there's serious academic work by people like Oliver Williamson and Oliver Hart, both of whom were awarded Nobel Prizes in economics for this work. And then Kate Vitasic at the University of Tennessee has done a really nice job of taking the hard academics and putting it into more popular form. For this discussion, I'm going to share a related practical analysis that has helped me immensely over the years to successfully handle transformational and complex work, like transformational outsourcing. And this is going to blow your mind. All right, well, that might be a little over the top, but it should profoundly impact the way you look at relationships going forward. And quite frankly, this is one of the most important topics in this entire series. Let's start on familiar ground by considering work that's not complex, then we'll back into complexity. Okay, here we go. One of the main attributes of a non-complex product is that you can write complete and accurate specifications for it. Now, this might not seem like a big deal, but it's huge because this means that you can completely describe whatever it is that you're buying in a contract. So once the product is delivered, you can go back to the specs in the contract and make sure it matches. If it doesn't, you know you didn't get what you thought you bought, and you have your normal contract remedies. Now, this characteristic has some interesting implications. The first is that the deal is party agnostic. This means that the star of the show is the product or service, and it really doesn't matter who's buying or selling it. For example, if you're going to buy number 2 pencils, a number 2 pencil is a number 2 pencil regardless of who's buying it and who's selling it. The other interesting implication is that price and value are inversely related. Because the product is fungible, the lower the cost, the higher the value. A 25-cent number 2 pencil is simply a better value than one that costs 50 cents, provided that they're both spec'd the same. Additionally, the market works normally, meaning that the buyer is free to switch with no real barriers. This is the type of work that most companies do most of the time. As a result, most sourcing/contracting processes are designed around non-complex products and non-complex relationships. If you can get it cheaper, it's better. If you can get stronger contract terms, well, that's better. And the negotiations can be focused mostly along those attributes because you can rely on the contract. So it's perfectly reasonable and rational to focus on contract terms and price in that situation. If you remember from the execution continuum video, we talked about something called the negotiator's dilemma. Now you can see how the negotiator's dilemma we discussed there could easily kick in and force us back into this model, even when there's a better way of working for other types of deals. Now this analysis isn't particularly difficult, but sometimes people can get thrown off because a product can be very complicated and expensive and still not be complex as we're using that term here. It's easy when you think of a number 2 pencil to see how it's not complex, but the same thinking holds true for something like a space shuttle or a car. As long as you can completely spec it out, and because of that you always know the quality you're getting, it's not complex. So to recap, a product or service is not complex if it can be completely spec'd out. There's an inverse relationship between price and value, the parties are fungible, and they're unencumbered in their participation in the market. Now let's contrast that with something like a systems integration or a transformational outsourcing, where you're looking for your provider to be a transformation partner. What's the difference between this and a non-complex relationship? Well, when we're looking at something complex, the parties are interdependent. There are economic rents, and complete contract economics applies. Complex relationships also don't necessarily have an inverse relationship between price and value. It's kind of like you wouldn't go to the cheapest doctor you can find to have open heart surgery. So let's look at the other attributes in a little more detail. Interdependence. If you've ever been involved in an ERP implementation, you know that being successful involves proficiency in areas like a systems integrator's technical expertise, the quality of their templates, their ability to effectively staff, their relationship with the OEM. But it also requires quite a bit of business acumen, the ability to extract candor, cultural alignment, all things that are not required when you're buying non-complex products or services. Now that's interesting enough, but success also depends on your ability to make decisions, your internal messaging, how your team shows up. Are your resources going to be available? Do you have the right internal support? Are your expectations reasonable? Are you change resistant? In other words, it takes both parties to make this work, and it's very difficult, if not impossible, to spec out everything in the contract. Now, keep in mind that I'm not talking about business requirements or specifications. You need those, they need to be documented, and they need to be right. But how you drive those requirements, getting those requirements met, how you get those specifications implemented in places where you may be encountering change resistance and territorial behavior, that's where relationship complexity plays a huge role. You just don't have these issues when you're dealing with number 2 pencils. So let's talk about economic rents. Have you ever felt irretrievably stuck? Put up with bad service, rode a bad relationship right into the ground? Well, welcome to economic rents. So what's an economic rent? Well, first of all, there are similar but different definitions depending on the circumstances. But for our purposes, the unique qualities of complex relationships can make it cost prohibitive and irrational in most cases for either side to leave the relationship. And this is very dangerous for the customer because it can flip their leverage position once the contract is signed and the work starts. Whether it's the beginning stages of an ERP, whether it's transition in an outsourcing, custom coding, reputational risk, or anything else that makes the relationship sticky, economic rents are going to apply. So let's look at an easy example of economic rents that anyone who's been involved in outsourcing has experienced firsthand. It's that T word. Transition. Transition should be easy, right? What's the big deal? You're just taking your operations, moving it to a third party, and then buying it back as a service. What could possibly go wrong? Transition is expensive. It's risky and incredibly disruptive. So once you transition, nobody wants to go through that again before they have to. This is why you have incumbent advantage at the end of the term. Because the cost of transition is so high, you're not a free participant in the market. In practice, this means that if you want to make a change, you have to include the cost of transition into the equation, and your new situation has to be that much better. And that cost includes not only the expense, but the risk and the disruption as well. So you really want to get this right because it's not easy to move, and getting it wrong can be very costly, not only because your program suffers, but you also have the opportunity cost of missing success. And economic rents can cause you to waste years in a bad situation, and that's a lot of opportunity cost. So if you've ever felt stuck in a bad deal, you'll be happy to know that you're not just grumpy. You've got some solid economic theory to back you up. Which brings us to incomplete contract economics. This is an area that can get kind of technical. So let's just bring it home with an example. If you've ever spent a ton of money, time, and energy to have an incredible outsourcing contract done with the best incredible SLAs, unbelievable, incredible pricing, all kinds of warranties, and a brilliant description of all the services that are going to be performed, only to have your outsourcing partner in a couple of years sit there and tell you they know it's in the contract, but they just can't do it. Well, you may have experienced incomplete contract economics firsthand. A contract is incomplete when it fails to deal with every contingency that can arise in the future. This leads both parties to know that renegotiation is going to happen as the contract is being executed. That leads to the holdup problem, which we'll come back to later. Take a step back and really think about contracts for outsourcing, ERP, or other transformational or that type of work that you've been involved in. No matter how complete the contract is, how many things can come up that simply aren't dealt with? Business changes, technology changes, people who are supposed to cooperate don't. Management changes. Environments are sometimes more complicated than the solution accounts for. There are literally thousands of these. Some are self-inflicted, some are oversights, and some are just not knowable at the time the contract is executed. And the problem is compounded because these unknowables can impact the knowables. You can agree to do something under certain assumptions, but if those assumptions turn out to be invalid or incomplete, it can change your ability to honor your commitments. This is one of the reasons why we'll have a whole video on how to conduct truthful negotiations that don't blow your position. Because in complex relationship formation, information is a burden that'll come back and bite you if you don't know how to get it on the table and worked through. But more on that later. Now, analytically, this can actually get very complicated. But without getting too much further down a rabbit hole, what can we do about this? Well, the first thing to remember is that the contract will still be enforceable. It just might not do what you want it to do. So you still want to do the best contract you can. But keep in mind that you may not, probably will not, be able to or even want to rely on the contract as your sole enforcement tool. In this kind of work, going nuclear with the contract is very costly in time, money, and focus. So most companies just don't want to go there, and rightly so. This is where a change in mindset really helps. Given relationship complexity, when you go out to quote-unquote pick a partner, you're also selling yourself into the market. This drives a level of complexity and sophistication into the formation process because your capabilities, your history, your background all enter into the mix. And if you don't know how to work this level of candor and truth into the formation process, you'll never be able to determine whether you're partnering with the right people to effectively get this job done, because you'll never see an accurate representation of how they are going to work in your environment, handle your challenges, recognize and help you realize your opportunities. In complex work, your approach to this entire process has to be holistic, with all of the artifacts of the program, from the specifications to the contract, becoming tools and anchors in a much larger and more sophisticated ecosystem. And the other videos in this series are going to go into depth on how to build that ecosystem. I know that this video was a bit of a lift, but now you have enough information about complexity to avoid jumping headfirst into a complex program without realizing that it's complex. Remember, the attributes of a complex relationship are: the parties are interdependent, there are economic rents, incomplete contract economics applies, and complex relationships also do not necessarily have an inverse relationship between price and value. Now here's a simple worksheet that might help. If the answer to any one of these is false, it's a good idea to treat your potential relationship as complex. It's much easier to deal with a non-complex situation that's been handled as complex than it is to go back in the other direction, which can be very costly and sometimes impossible. That will be covered in the next video on Transformation Theater. I look forward to seeing you there.